I often am doing a lot of editing for professors in Latin American studies or that have a focus on Latin American culture. And so often they're not native English speakers. And so what I do to figure out how long it's going to take me so that I can give them a quote is I'll do a test read. So I'll ask them to send me about 10 pages of their writing, and then I'll read it and time myself, and then I'll times it out to figure out how many pages I can read in an hour, and then usually they'll tell you how many pages their document is, or their book is, or whatever it is they're sending you, and then that's how I provide a quote, and that's usually pretty accurate. I think that's a really good way to do it, and I think $50 an hour is pretty good for academic book editing, especially if you're really just doing line editing. If you're, and like kind of helping with sentence structure, I think if you're gonna do more content-based editing, if you're gonna help with structure or help them with research, you should charge more. I'd say like more like $75 an hour for that. So it just kind of depends on the editing job. But I'm often, I'm doing it completely virtually. I'm just exchanging chapters in Word and sending them track changes. And then, they'll send it to their publisher, and generally it goes really well. Sometimes we'll do a second run through because the publisher wants it cleaned up a little bit more. But often publishers have somebody to do like the really fine, like final edit. But it can be really fun, a great way to earn money if you enjoy reading academic books. So the Grant Professionals Association that I'm a part of, that Kathy's a part of, and Bobby, are you part of it? That's usually seen as unethical, just because you're taking money from the foundation that's supposed to be used for a project and you're using it to fund the writing of the proposal. And it's also ethically problematic if your client doesn't pay you up front, because often you're going to write the grant and then there's going to be like a long time until you hear if you get the grant, and I would never suggest only agreeing to only be paid if they get the grant, because really so often the reason that people are not getting grants has nothing to do with you. It has nothing to do with like how well you wrote the grant. It's often about the project, and if you're working for a client, it's great to advise your client on their project and try to help them as much as possible, but they don't always listen to you, and there's really not a lot you can do. And I think as long as you're being upfront with them about, these are the concerns I have about this grant, and they agree, they should pay you up front, and you should proceed that way. Which can be hard, but I think that's really important. I've done some pro bono work, especially to get started. I think that can be a good thing to do, because often you are writing grants for nonprofits that don't have really much money, and it can be a really good way to get experience. But I would never suggest taking the money out of the grant. Do other people have comments on that?
Sarah, did you set up a LC or something like that to do this?
No, but you certainly could. I would say it, yeah. I think that kind of does depend on the grant and what they're asking you to do. So some grants are really little. So sometimes, I work for the Art Center, so they just have me. They're happy to be like, work on this tiny grant because they're already paying me. Why not? But there are the grants that are like $1,000, right? And so I think you don't want to charge, if you're charging like too much. There's really no point. But I think it really depends on the grant. I think for just really writing a proposal where they really have the project figured out pretty well, I'd say maybe $60 an hour. Certainly consulting, like large grant consulting groups, charge $75 an hour or more, up to $150 an hour. So that's kind of the range.
I think it also depends a little bit on what they want you to do, because in some cases they'll want you to come in and actually work through an entire development plan with them and figure out various sources of funding. And even as a consultant, you're advising them about how to orchestrate their program itself in order to be more competitive for that grant application. And that's a whole different level of commitment than simply working with one proposal. I earned money for graduate school when I was going to graduate school doing freelance work, mostly in Kansas City. because back then it wasn't all online like it is now. And I made a lot of connections there. I had several job offers when I finished graduate school. I just didn't want to commute all the time. So it's another good way to network, to get your name out there, to get known. And there's a lot of need for that kind of work too.
Another thing, especially probably more so outside of the humanities specifically, you can talk to your advisor and see if they're applying for any grants or fellowships, and see if you can help them out and gain experience that way. I know a few people, there are some grants that you can get on to some extent. And usually they enjoy not having to write the details. So that's something that you could talk to your advisor about too.
There are also companies that hire people that they're like an umbrella organization for freelancers where they connect you with jobs and so on. They take a percentage of what you earn, of course, like anything. And there are companies that actually do the kind of program that we did tonight, grant development workshops all over the country, and you can get jobs doing that as well. And they train you in it, they put you out there, and those jobs can pay pretty well.
So, continuing on that theme, would you need to get any kind of certification to begin doing freelance work, or like how can you prove yourself that you can actually write these grants?
There are a number of certification programs out there. The one that freelancers use the most in grant development is probably the GPC, Grant Professional Certification, which is offered through a organization connected with the Grant Professional Association. I took that certification and kept it up for a few years and then realized I didn't want to do freelancing, and so I let it go. It's the one that's recognized most among consultants and freelancers and the organizations that hire them. But you don't need that certification to start doing this kind of thing. And in fact, you'll have an easier job of getting certified if you actually are doing some of this work to begin with. I get questions all the time from faculty who want to hire me to do editing. I don't have time for that kind of thing, and I'd like to be able to have more names than Sarah's to give out to them. So, you know, make yourself known out there as somebody who's willing to do that kind of thing.
Yeah, those are all good points. I also think you can just kind of dive in, especially if it's a smaller grant and, you know, maybe someone who really needs help and can't afford anything else, you know, because then it's like, hey, I'm somebody. I'm trying to help you. I think also what are we offering in terms of our grant support for graduate students who are writing grants now? Bobby?
Bobby, what do you mean? What support do you offer for graduate students writing grant proposals?
Workshops like this one.
Are you doing any more of we used to do sometimes like the one-on-ones with people. Do we do that now?
I work with graduate students who want to write a fellowship proposal.
Yeah.
Right.
So like if you do want to, that's a good way to get experience too. I mean, so you could come in, work with Bobby on a fellowship for you, and that might be a good like starter to kind of get some practice and have somebody who's a professional like give you some feedback.
Okay, well, thank you all.
Please. Thank you.